Rise up and wise up. It is the Sagely Wisdom Podcast. Thank you kindly for tuning in today on this Wisdom Wednesday or whenever you are happening to catch the show. I'm your host, Mike Troop, and happy to be here with you. Couple housekeeping details as usual before we jump into today's story. Just want to remind you that you can follow the Sagely Wisdom Podcast on Facebook. Give it a like, facebook.com/SagelyWisdom1865. That's also closely tied to our email address. If you have any interest in being on the show, you can message us on Facebook. You can send an email to sagelywisdom1865@gmail.com. It's sagelywisdom1865@gmail.com. And of course, if you're enjoying the show, why not go ahead and subscribe on iTunes or your podcast platform of choice. Just type in Sagely Wisdom in the search. We should pop right up. And with that out of the way, it's time to get to today's story, and it's one that I would say is universally applicable. If you have a job, one that pays you money, this applies to you, because today's show is called How to Get Mo Money. It's contrary to what Kelly Price sang in Biggie's 1997 hit Mo Money, Mo Problem. She told us the mo money we come across, the mo problems we see. Well, today's storyteller, Katherine Gerber, doesn't quite see it that way. Katherine is a second-year MBA student here at Cornell, and she spent 7 years of her pre-MBA life as a director of outreach and partnerships in the nonprofit world, and she has negotiated her salary on a number of occasions. Katherine is extremely passionate about getting more women involved in the business world, but she doesn't just want them getting into the business world. She wants them there and making mo money. So that's what today's story is all about. And without further ado, let's get on to Katherine with how to get mo money.
Women typically earn about 90% of what men are paid until they hit the age of 35. After that, median earnings for women are typically 74 to 82% of what men are paid, according to the American Association of University Women. The fact that many smart women don't negotiate for their salaries makes me angry and frustrated and deeply sad, because women will lose out on about $1 million over the course of their lifetime because of not advocating for themselves and structural issues. I felt I needed to do something about this. How to Get More Money is not a session on what you may gain from taking a Johnson professor's class on negotiations or from the Career Management Center. It is, however, a reflection on what tactics have allowed me to increase my salary and how you can use some of those. From a very young age, my mom taught me how to negotiate for my salary because she was a professional woman in the 80s who had to teach herself. And I've always thought of myself as a future breadwinner of my household because I've never been taught any other way. I never wanted to rely on a man for money, because during my time as a sociology major, I read so many stories of women not leaving abusive relationships because of financial dependence that I actively wanted to avoid that position. So I negotiated my salary for my first job, and my second, and my third. I kept up on negotiation tactics and talked with professionals in the space, and I went to women's conferences to learn how to do this better. But it was when I found out that people who previously had my job made significantly more than me and were equally qualified that I changed how I approached the subject from achievement to activism. When I found a piece of paper that showed this information, I felt cheated and undervalued. I found myself standing there with a piece of paper, just staring at it, wondering why I was worthless, why the nights I spent at the office until 12 a.m. and the partnerships I had built and the marketing campaigns I had run and the leadership and mentorship I showed to other employees and the personal sacrifices I had made for the company weren't enough. It felt degrading and preposterous. It's hard to pick up from that moment. It's hard to be resilient and convince yourself that you needed to fix this oversight or purposeful manipulation or whatever it was, instead of running away from it. But if we are going to make strides in closing the gender pay gap, I needed to address it. I had to find a way to convince people who thought I wasn't worth as much to believe I was, without tarnishing my reputation at the company. And preparation was key. My first step was to change my mindset. The next day, I walked my butt into my office with my head held high, believing I produced fantastic, valuable work, and I increased my work ethic for the next 2 weeks. I engaged more with my bosses. I told them more about the projects I wanted to accomplish in the next few months and in the coming year. And I casually brought up the fact that my staff were happier, more productive, and more creative in the last few months due to the changes I had made. I never brought up salary. My second step was to plan what my next move was. I scheduled a meeting with my boss for the following week, not during my one-on-one regular time. I gathered information from the Department of Labor, Glassdoor, and a bunch of other pay sites to have in my back pocket. I had reframed my nonprofit job description in terms of for-profit job descriptions and made sure that my numbers were accurate. I purposefully linked my contributions to growth at the company, and I practiced discussing these topics with my roommates to ensure I felt comfortable talking about my contributions. I practiced asking for more money. Luckily, it was still before budget decisions were made at the exec's pre-annual meeting that I met with my boss. But when those 2 weeks were over, I asked my boss at our weekly check-in if I could meet with her on Friday to discuss my contributions at the company and about my growth plan. When that meeting came, I knew I needed to own my own accomplishments. Yeah, my team members had done a lot, but so had I. And I created the environments in which they could be creative and productive. I had created the systems under which they could improve interactions with clients. I had reduced our spending in a variety of areas. I started off the conversation by telling my boss that I was really enjoying working on my current projects, but that I wanted to make her more aware of both past accomplishments and my growth plan to gain feedback and discuss my trajectory. Salary hadn't been mentioned yet. I wanted to convey my value before I talked numbers. And if numbers had to be discussed tomorrow, then so be it. I wanted her to know that I kicked butt at my job. So I did just that. I told her about the things I had done, what I was planning to do, and how I wanted to grow the company. She became more invested in me and my growth. She knew I was kicking butt. So then I approached the daunting subject. I said, so I want to discuss one more factor that reflects my performance and contributions. My economic value. Last year, I took on this position hoping to accomplish, and then I said what I was hoping to accomplish. I've done that, and to more accurately reflect what I've done and to support the time and effort I want to put into this work, I believe that my salary should increase by X amount per day. She wasn't stunned, but she did think hard before she responded. She said the appropriate thank you and that she would talk with our VP of Operations and our CEO about it. A week later, I found out I got half the raise I wanted. And the first thing I did was thank her. I thanked her profusely, and I said I was looking forward to achieving our goals in the next year. I also said that I was hoping for the higher number because of X contributions, and that I'd like to continue the conversation and check in a couple months about my performance and how it can be further reflected in my salary. She agreed. I continued to have these meetings on a quarterly basis, and a year later, I got that extra bump. There are a few pieces of advice I received during this process that helped me frame what I said and did, and that ultimately made me successful. Number one is that I asked for a raise annually. So whatever company I was at, if the company values your worth, then they'll pay attention to your needs. If they don't, you'll have to continue the conversation and ask again later. but it's really important that you ask annually, at least. The second piece was to ask before budget decisions are made. You want to influence those budget decisions, not be influenced by them. The third piece was to pay attention to gender stereotypes. As much as we hate to admit how we as women are perceived when we negotiate, it's necessary that we defy the expectations that women are not good at standing behind their value and that women are overly aggressive. We need to beat the system. So use your talents to break those barriers. In fact, one piece of advice from a Cornell professor was to be relentlessly pleasant. The fourth piece of advice is to ask for a raise even when there is a pay freeze. Women don't normally ask for raises during pay freezes, and men typically do. There's data to back this up. My company was facing a pay freeze for 3 years when I was there, and I got my raises. The fifth piece of advice is to talk to the right people. I didn't just talk to my direct boss. I also shared my accomplishments with others at the company, taking an informant role instead of a self-promoting role. They needed to know about initiatives that were going on, and if others weren't going to share that information, then I was. Number 6, set high targets. Not unreasonable, just high. And to do this, you'll need to ask your male friends and male colleagues for advice on this, and not your female friends, because typically, women aren't asking for the higher amount. Number 7 is that you can catch more dollars with honey than you do with vinegar. It's as simple as that. So why don't we get the money that we want, generally? Women don't negotiate their very first salary, usually, which automatically puts them behind. So their first-year bonuses are determined by a percentage of their salary, which is already behind. In addition, performance reviews that directly reflect self-promotion and gender bias, things like, she's a steady worker, and he's hard charging, usually put women behind in getting that extra bump. And maybe she gets pregnant and misses out on an opportunity to increase her salary that year, because an employer doesn't think that that investment in her is worth it. By the way, that's the company's problem, not hers. So, as managers and business leaders, we have an important role in fixing this ginormous problem. Know that it's sexist to assume that women need to fit into a work setting that inherently rewards people for masculine characteristics. You can also be aware of the bias that you place on people on how they perform. Know that your female employees deserve just as much money as the men for the work they put in, even if they aren't self-promoting. You can also know that she may be a breadwinner and need the extra cash just as much as the guy down the hall who's raising a family. You should ensure that she has just as many opportunities to take on new projects or has access to information like her male counterparts. Think about supporting her comments and ideas in meetings by calling out her contributions so that people who are giving out raises can see these contributions as well. And talk to her about her goals and what she wants to do for the company. But you may need to initiate that discussion. When she uses self-deprecating language like, I only did, or it was mostly the team who did this, call her out on it privately and tell her that she can own those accomplishments. Tell her that you want to see her take initiative if you want her to take initiative. If we do this as a community, then the pay gap will begin to close, but it's not going to do it on its own. As someone who cares deeply about the friends who I've taught to own their own accomplishments and negotiate effectively, I hope that you'll make small gestures of support that will ultimately help us tackle the larger issue of pay inequity.
Thank you to Katherine Gerber for making today's episode of Sagely Wisdom possible. If you are like Katherine or like Matt, Graham, myself, you have stories from your pre-MBA life that you want to share. It could be little tidbits of wisdom like Katherine shared. It could just be a funny anecdote. Doesn't matter if it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes. We will take it here on the show. If you want to get involved and share it with everyone through the majesty of the podcast medium, reach out to this show, sagelywisdom1865@gmail.com. We would be thrilled to have you. But until next Wisdom Wednesday, it's time for us to sign off. I am Mike Troop. I appreciate you for tuning in. We are all, hopefully, a little bit more the wiser.